federal lands and the ownership that the federal government has of our natural resources here in Wyoming. We all know that one of our major partners when we talk about undertakings like this is not just the state government, but how does the federal government play, and the various agencies that we work with, how does that have to play into some of the bold plans that we have? With that, I'd like to turn it over to Shawn, and Shawn will give us a little bit of perspective on that economic landscape and some of the building blocks that we might need. And we can, if you want, we can just sit and stand, whichever you prefer.
I might stand so I can see this side of the audience. Well, thank you for the introduction, Jeane, and thank you for your words, Ian. Appreciate that. They're very insightful and have a lot of applicability to what we want to do here in Wyoming. Bill Schilling asked me to pick Ian up at the airport yesterday, and so anticipating hour-and-a-half drive with someone I hadn't met, I wanted to do a little background research on Ian and understand a little bit more about him. I had to look no further than my stack of subscriptions to Alberta Oil magazine to get some insight into Ian. A couple interesting things about him. One, he bikes to work, has done so for 30 years, 20 kilometers a day, boxes on Saturdays. But there was something pretty intriguing to me about his thoughts about complex issues like developing a large-scale industrial-based value-add, things that seem to be impossible and are fraught with challenges. So this is a passage from an article in Alberta Oil magazine from last May. For years, every misstep, every problem, and every budget increase had been recorded by the press, but McGregor persisted through it all. With these things, there's going to be hundreds of thousands of problems, he said. First of all, you have to like solving problems, and people here like solving problems. They believe it's the future of the place, and they're on a mission to prove that it can be done here. For McGregor, it's not just about building the project of a lifetime, it's about building a future for generations to come. I think if we don't do it, my kids and my grandkids won't be able to live the way I did, he says. It's the same attitude that we have here in Wyoming. The problem that we are solving, and as the governor discussed this morning, the problem that we've been trying to solve for a long time is that of economic diversification. We say economic diversification so often, it's almost become a cliche, and we risk losing sight of what that means. And there's a variety of things about what diversification means. It means diversifying the contributors to our GDP. It means diversification of business models so that existing companies are more resilient as markets and technologies change. It means diversifying opportunities for our youth. And it means, as relevant to this discussion, diversification of the products produced by our economic bases, energy and minerals. We could have other discussions about diversification of tourism, diversification of agriculture. This is a long-term problem to solve, and I appreciate and look forward to working with Governor Mead and his co-chairman Greg Hill in a 20-year plan. It's greater than one agency. This is more than the Wyoming Business Council. There are many pieces to this. So if diversification is the end, then economic development is the means to that end. Unfortunately, sometimes economic development gets a bad rap, and you hear such things as corporate welfare, winners and losers, grants, build it and they will come. Economic development isn't those things. Economic development is solving problems. It's not a linear activity. It is not build it and they will come. It's a three-dimensional problem with three-dimensional solutions that need to be thought through and aligned. In the economic development world, we think of building blocks. And a friend of mine, Kevin Kirchiznik, this afternoon is going to talk more about this. But these building blocks all need to be at play. Their leadership and public policy, workforce, infrastructure, communities and quality of life, research and innovation and technology transfer, entrepreneurship, existing business expansion, recruitment. Those building blocks, as applied to adding value to our natural resources, is, again, a long-range activity, and it doesn't happen overnight. But the state of Wyoming, we have been putting those blocks into place for quite some time. Governor Mead this morning named a number of things that we have done over the years, but let me add a few more that I feel relate more directly to this topic of value add. The legislature, the governor's office, previous governors, they've created legal frameworks for CO2 sequestration. We've mapped out CO2 pipeline corridors. Integrated Test Center is meant to find new uses for CO2 at one of our CO2 factories. Wyoming has been the premier state for developing innovation in terms of regulation, whether it's going back to the Industrial Siting Council of the 1970s or more recently model baseline water permitting, sage grouse permitting. In the last several years, we have done more to develop international relationships. We have entered into agreements with other countries who are looking to add value to coal and find responsible ways to convert coal into new products. We have, through the legislative efforts, worked with other energy-producing states and find coalitions that can advance common interests. So those are many of the things. It's a small sample, but some important pieces that we've put together in this three-dimensional puzzle, this Rubik's Cube, if you will. But there are a lot of other blocks that need to be thought out, and what the composition of those blocks is will largely be determined by what we hear from industry. And that industrial perspective is very important. As we have met with industry to get to know what they are looking for, what would it take for you to make a large capital investment in the state of Wyoming for value add? Here's some ideas of things that we hear. First, we need to have a better understanding of those market opportunities, project risks, cost estimates, all of that front-end engineering and design, so that when we go to identify anchor tenants or investors, we know what the risks are and we can think through how to mitigate those risks. Part of that is doing what Ian suggested in finding those competitive advantages and understanding the scalability of certain things. Second, we've heard from industry that we need to think regionally. One of the challenges, which is actually an opportunity as well for Wyoming, is that we're sparsely populated. And to find the labor pool that would be necessary to support larger scale industrial activities, we can't think within our county boundaries. We need to think regionally and bring together all of the different service providers, companies, community colleges within a particular region to take advantage of the many assets that we have, whether it's coal or helium, natural gas, uranium, oil, trona, bentonite. Regionalism doesn't just mean within Wyoming. I think that as part of a energy producing area of the continent, from the Rockies all the way up to Alberta and Saskatchewan, we have a lot of opportunities through those regional partnerships. Next is regulatory mapping and permitting regimes. As I mentioned before, Wyoming has been a premier state in terms of protecting its environment while balancing energy development in the economy. However, we need to do more to think about what are those regulations of the future. But also, as we think about larger scale industrial campuses like the Heartland, our approach to permitting company by company by company may not be enough. We may need to think about new ways of overlay zones so that multiple companies can come in under a single permitting regime that encompasses air quality, water quality, all of those environmental protections. But they have a much easier path forward, less risk involved, but are still assuring that they will protect the environment and our wildlife. Mapping out those regulatory processes and thinking of new permitting regimes for these larger scale activities will help us identify ways to streamline, to cut costs, to entice investment while not forgetting about the importance of our environment and the scenic beauty that we have, which is in and of itself a large, significant, important economic driver. Next is workforce development plans. We have a great opportunity to align the efforts of our community college systems, the needs of business and industry, University of Wyoming, the K-12 system. All of the workforce development efforts are looking to the same thing, developing the skills for the next generation. But now through the Governor's Endow Initiative, we have a great opportunity to learn more from industry and business. What are those skill sets that will be needed in the next 20 years, including those skill sets that would be needed for value-added industrial activities? And how can we better align ourselves to those ends? And then finally, infrastructure development plans. For these larger scale projects, the Alberta Heartland, there's a tremendous need to coordinate the location of infrastructure, understand capacity, whether it's power or pipelines, but also to think differently about heat and power and new sources of energy, the heat that will be needed for these different processes, how to integrate and how to make sure that that infrastructure is well thought out, and it may make us think about new ways of financing this larger scale infrastructure. So those are some samples of things that we hear from industry as we put together all of these complex Rubik's Cube for industrial development. I look forward to hearing my other fellow panelists hopefully comment on pieces of that. Again, thank you, Ian, for giving us a great example to follow. It is an important thing for us to be working towards. A lot of pieces are in place, and I feel very strongly that with the Governor's Endow Initiative, we're going to line up those pieces of this giant Rubik's Cube. Thank you.
Do I have to? Thanks, Shawn. As Jeane said, I'm Cindy Crane. Jeane asked us to, on the panel, to spend about 5 minutes kind of weighing in on some of the things. Apparently we have to hold the button. Jeane asked me to talk a little bit about process and how important process is to move us forward. But I want to back up for just a moment and weigh in just a little bit on what the governor said, what Ian said, and what Shawn said. I mean, at the end of the day, in Wyoming, we have all of the core ingredients in this state to do what we're talking about doing, and to do it in a grand scale. And I think the challenge that we first face is pulling all the information, the old plans that we've done over the years, and leveraging the information we already have today to put together a comprehensive look at things and start to look at the action plan component of that so that we can mobilize on components. And I think comprehensive, to me, is absolutely critical. Whether it's regional, whether it's statewide, whether it's recreation, whether it's energy, whether it's agriculture, and the various different opportunities that we have, I think we have to look at them in a holistic fashion as we're setting out and embarking on the path. So I wanted to talk just a little bit about process, because the great thing is we don't have to reinvent the wheel, because we can look to others who have done this or embarked on similar journeys. Obviously, they face different opportunities and challenges than we might here, but it's a common framework to move forward. And I think the industrial heartland and looking at that is a fabulous example, and we can take a lot from that. I've had the opportunity to work in 6 of our western states and live in 6 of the western states when those states were at various different stages of either growth or a need to stimulate growth in their states. And I think the one differentiator that I've noticed throughout that period of time is it's about how those states have gone about it. It's either the process they did or did not undertake that ultimately put them onto the path of success that they've achieved. And so as I think about that, I look to other ways and things that have been done. And I currently reside in the state of Utah, and I look at what has been done from a process standpoint. They obviously have different challenges and opportunities. And there's a public-private partnership that was put in place called Envision Utah. And it was about your Utah, your future. And it was really the long-term plan that Governor Mead is talking about for the path that they're trying to plot for themselves. And I think we can take a lot from that. And most importantly, it was public-private partnership. It was collaborative. It had cities, state agencies, it had business leaders, it's got community leaders, and it's got the citizens in general that were involved at different steps along the way in that process. And ultimately, it's a plan for the citizens of the state on how they want to grow their state, and more importantly, what's important to the citizens within our state here in Utah or in Wyoming. And I think we need to think on that grand of a scale from a standpoint of comprehensiveness. I had an opportunity earlier this week. I was in Reno, and I took a city mayor and a city manager and an economic development manager over to just outside of Reno, outside of the Sparks area, because they are looking at doing not unlike what we're looking at here in Wyoming, although on a much smaller scale, which is to truly grow their economic development and their footprint of their city. We went to Reno because there was a large development that's going on outside of Reno that is just being done in a different way. There was a plan that got put together, and they defied convention on how they were going to approach it. And one of the things that was most fascinating when Shawn just talked about regulations and permitting was the concept of speed to vertical. And they took that and they embraced it. And an example of that was when Tesla came to talk with them about a potential construction of a gigafactory, they literally handed Tesla their permit on their first visit because they'd gone through and decided what they could do, and how they were going to enable their development. And Tesla could not believe they just were handed a permit in order to advance that. And I think that's just an example of when we step back and we think differently, and we think about why can't we just do this, and push those limits of the old traditional structures or regulations or processes that we have. It is amazing what we truly can do. And within that construct, they've not only built the gigafactory, but the whole economic development complex is enormous, and it's brought a lot of other business. The other thing on vertical that I found fascinating is, as they were talking here this morning about our agriculture from the vertical nature that we've just put in it here in Wyoming. Well, they're doing that also in manufacturing, because it's about reducing our footprint on how much land we're going to use and how we're going to use it so we can preserve our natural beauty within our states. And that's exactly what we saw when we went to Reno as well. Albeit there were a lot of manufacturing facilities, but they were multi-level floor manufacturing facilities. The other thing I found really fascinating was infrastructure, hard infrastructure. Historically, we've always thought as it's permanent. And we build it and it stays that way. There's a whole new thinking out there so that they can have the speed to market, the ingenuity, the technology evolution and advancement. And we saw that in spades when we went into the Tesla Gigafactory. There are no offices, there's IKEA furniture, and everybody walks in and just finds a place to plug their computer. And these are engineers, these are Panasonic engineers on the battery side, not just the Tesla manufacturing side. And they had temporary little kitchens out in the middle of the floor, and they literally are moving their manufacturing almost every month as they're progressively changing and growing with the evolution of their technology. And it's just mobile. Everything's mobile. And I know what would happen if I went back to my business today and told my employees that we were going to that environment. I probably wouldn't be able to get out of the parking lot. But when we think about the way things are moving, and we heard a lot about that today, that's the type of thinking that we're going to have to apply when we start looking at how we want to develop and grow here in Wyoming. We have all of the foundations, whether it's the vast natural beauty or the rich natural resources or just the fundamental frontier spirit that is throughout every person in the state and all of our generations. So we need to look at how we tap that. And I do think from a planning standpoint, I think comprehensive, I think but regional, but making sure it's all the regional plans connect together. Because at the end of the day, they will be fully integrated. To be successful across the state, we're going to have to integrate them, but we can do some regional planning and bring them all together. We don't need to worry about electricity. You know, I happen to be sitting here from Rocky Mountain Power. Well, we have all the electrical power. We consume a very small percentage of the electric power that we generate and produce in this state. But where we need it really matters. Because do we have the infrastructure to get it where we need it? And that's where the comprehensive planning comes in. We need to look at what kind of growth in the different parts of the regions. And I would say it's not just the energy side of that growth, but it's the recreational side of that growth. It's the all aspects of growth that we want to interconnect, because it becomes an economy and a way of life, a lifestyle that we want here in Wyoming. And I think the process is so important of how we put a process together, who we engage, and how we advance it. But the risk is we get caught up in process. We can't do another plan that doesn't have immediate actions that are delivering results coming from it. And I think the governor, with the announcement he made today on Endow, is setting a great framework for us to now step back and say, okay, how do we mobilize it all? And the public-private partnership aspect cannot be underestimated. We have got a lot of experience of that here in Wyoming. We look at the University of Wyoming, and the success in the School of Energy Resources has hugely been driven by the public-private partnerships that get in place there. And so we have all of the enablers. I think we just need to pull it together and look at it and say, we want to go this way in this region, we want to go this way in this region. Shawn talked about workforce. You know, we have a few large coal plants in the state, and we were looking at putting a nuclear plant potentially, and we were looking at our Jim Bridger site. And I will tell you, workforce is a big deal. And it's not just about keeping the workforce in the state or keeping them from leaving, but it's about how are we going to import more, because we're going to need a lot more than we grow here in the state. And so we need to be thinking about the types of workforce that the different growth industries that we're wanting to look at need to attract, and where and how we're going to get them, as well as how we're going to retain them, because it's extremely important, and it's just one piece of the puzzle. I like what Ian said about the CO2. It's not going away. That's a way of our future, and it doesn't matter what the environmental regulations are. That is a fundamental societal-driven point today. Our society wants a clean environment. And so as we look at the development of the different regions and the different types of economic development, we need to make sure that we have the right energy efficiency and types of technologies, and we need to make sure we're incenting and enabling those technologies to be used by those new facilities. There's no reason why we can't have the products that Trona is put into. There's no reason we can't have those manufacturing jobs and businesses right near our Trona. There's no reason we can't, why are we piping our raw product, our extraction products, to the refineries in the state of Utah? We can process those right here close to the source. And so we need to break down the barriers and look at how we do that. And I think that the thinking process that Jack talked about earlier today is absolutely critical. And we've got to spend the time to think, but we can't get caught up in process at the same time. So I look forward to the conversation today. I wasn't planning on talking about the actual energy industry per se necessarily, but really more about process and how we can put the tools together and then build the infrastructure that's going to manage, drive, and enable it, I think becomes our critical path item.
Cindy? There we go. Thanks, Cindy. Thanks. Thanks very much for the introduction as well. And yeah, it's been interesting and stimulating. I agree with Jeane. I feel one of my 20-year-old engineers should probably be here rather than me after the humbling first discussion. Just to give you a little bit about, so as Jeane said, I'm CEO of TATA Chemicals North America. So just TATA, for those of you who don't know us as a group, an Indian based and owned group. We're about $100 billion a year. We have over 600,000 employees. We have more employees globally than there are people in Wyoming, which is a bit of a crazy thought. You'll be familiar with some of our, we call ourselves a salt to software company. I like to call us a soda ash to software company. But you'll be familiar with some of the brands we have, like our motors, Jaguar Land Rover, in our beverages business, Tetley Tea, in our hotels, the Pierre Hotel in New York. But what I'm interested in is obviously our soda ash business, which comes from our Trona-based operations in Green River. One of the things about sort of TATA as a group, one of the things our chairman says, we had a value creation conference about a year ago, is at TATA we always are focused on and think about the next quarter. But when we talk about the next quarter, we're talking about the next quarter of a century, not necessarily the next 3 months. And that's something that chimes very, very strongly with me all the time in thinking about what we do about our operations and our business. And I think it chimes very strongly as well with the governor's announcement this morning of the new initiative around the Endow piece about looking over the next 20 years. Because you can't do anything of the sort of scale that we're talking about here if you're thinking about the normal political cycles. So if we truly are going to engage in developing a strategic plan, we have to be thinking sort of out on the scale of sort of quarter century. One of the other big things for me is that I get a lot of opportunity to go back to India, sort of back to headquarters, if you like, in Mumbai. And one of the things you can't escape from there when you go back is the energy of the country and the people. We were delighted to be able to have Governor Mead come through Mumbai for a few days last year when he was doing one of his tours. And what you get there is this sort of collaborative feel. Everybody, be it from business to employees, to labor, to the bureaucracy, have a passion to, and what they're trying to do is they're building a country, actually. You've got a billion people driving to want to make life better, to add more value. And I think in a lot of ways that's actually what we're trying to do in Wyoming, is to develop that collaborative spirit whereby we're all working together to build a new future. And I think there are a lot of challenges in that. And, if I look at my own business, and I did feel quite humbled by Jack's sort of talk at the beginning there, and it just made me think about the challenges that we face. One of the opportunities that I think the Trona industry and Trona business brings is some of our perspective as a successful industry and business already in the state. We're a truly global business, and there's already been some talk about we shouldn't think on the county level, we shouldn't think on the sort of even the regional state level. I really would encourage in all this thinking when we think about the new sort of Endow initiative is that we truly think globally. In terms of global markets and global investors and global collaborators. The Trona industry, we make soda ash. I don't know if those of you familiar with statistics, but we export 50%, export out of the US 50% of all the product that we make here in Wyoming. We represent 25% of the global supply of soda ash, of a 60 million ton a year business. So we are a globally dominant business already. Here in Wyoming, there are 4 operators up in Green River on the patch. 3 of those operators are internationally, globally owned. So TATA ourselves, an Indian company. Solvay is a European company. Jeane now a Turkish company. And Tronox is a domestic US company. So we already have a huge international presence. From an investment point of view. One of the problems I think that those international companies have, or we as a state have from that point of view, is that those companies tend to see it as a natural resource that we're taking out of the ground, maybe doing some processing as we process to soda ash, and then sort of shipping off around the world and not thinking about necessarily the potential for more value add. And I think one of the things we have to do is to draw in some of those sort of international investing companies to become more a part of what is going on in the state and part of the challenge. The other thing I think an opportunity, and the reason I guess maybe why I'm set up here, is I expressed an interest early on. I've been here about 3 years, when I met with Governor Mead and some other business folk from the state, starting to talk about the concept of the Heartland Project. And certainly I was very quick to put the hand up and say I think the Trona Patch is possibly one of the locations where we could look at leveraging that. But also one of the reasons I think is if you think about what we have, so we're a very energy intensive business, so we have a need for energy. A couple of us on the patch run our own power stations. They're relatively old power stations. At some point we need to repower the patch, and we need to think about, and that may create a great opportunity for some more newer, highly efficient energy. One of the nice attractions of making soda ash is we both need electricity and heat. So therefore it makes us a perfect partner for a highly efficient power station. To Ian's point, I think we have to take seriously the future of the whole CO2 economy. We have an interest because we're power intensive, so we're running power stations. But actually we intrinsically produce CO2 in making soda ash from Trona. We're actually digging CO2 up out of the ground, and where we can calcine it, and part of the processing is we're releasing CO2. So irrespective of the energy aspect of CO2 production, we have a huge vested interest in solving and creating solutions and value adds for CO2 in our industry. The other thing was we were a relatively sort of, maybe not be a dinosaur, but we're a relatively old and established industry. We've been around for 40 or 50 years. We've got factories which are anything from sort of 20 to 50 years old. So we're somewhat old in our thinking. We're, to Jack's point, probably in terms of the factory, the management, and the workforce, we definitely all see the yellow yield sign and not the red yield sign. And there's no doubt about that in terms of our thinking. And our challenge is, how do we unlock and change that? And we have to reinvent ourselves. There's no doubt about that. And I think we're a great opportunity. So I offer up, not just TATA with a sort of a 25-year time horizon, but I'll be bold enough to offer up on behalf of the other three players, my competitors on the patch, as the industry, as we're a perfect partner and catalyst for a lot of the things that we want to do here. So we want to reinvent energy. We want to reinvent CO2 value add. We want to reinvent our factories. So we should be a partner to anybody who's got any ideas who wants to come and work with us. As Jeane mentioned, if you look at my bio, I had about 4 or 5 years out when I left running a big industry, sort of to actually operating as I was employee number 2 in a tech startup in the UK out of the University of Manchester, and ran that for 4 years with a VC, trying to bring a new technology to market. I tell you, that is by far the hardest job I've ever done. Running $1 billion a year business is a piece of cake by comparison. If you're trying to find new markets, trying to find customers, trying to raise capital. But one of the biggest challenges with any new innovation, new technologies, is you need to prove it, you need to try it. You need customers, you need people who are prepared to work with you. That's the biggest challenge by far. I think what's incumbent on us, in a state like Wyoming, traditional existing businesses, is we should be providing, the sandbox. We should be providing the test centers the ability to do that. So if you've got a technology that's going to do something with CO2, come and talk to us. Come and work with us. We've got a source of CO2, so we can help you try and sort of develop that. If you've got new ideas in energy, you can work with us. If we want to diverse our industry, we can do that. I've got a relatively old, controlled factory. Come and try ideas of using AI, smart technology, the factory of the future. I know I need to reinvent myself. I've got no idea how to do it. So what we need to do is offer ourselves up as partners to let people come and do that. And I think we should be thinking about doing that on a statewide basis as well. So we should be almost the sandbox, and we should be calling on people globally to come and play in our sandbox, because that's where we're going to be able to then generate new ideas and new opportunities. So I really would encourage think globally, because we already have significant, very successful global businesses here in the state. Let's think collaboratively. We all need to work together with a common aim and vision and passion to want to make the state better, to make better use of our resources. And let's encourage people to come in. I liked one of the pieces that Jack said in terms of workforce, and Cindy just mentioned it. We need to be not just keeping our people in, but attracting new people in. Not even bringing Wyoming folks back. But one of the things that Jack mentioned is even in this incredibly doubling sort of every whatever timescale sort of period we're in, people are also still going to want some of those quality of life things. And one of the things that Wyoming offers is that phenomenal quality of life. So let's, in a world population of, 7 or 8 billion people, I don't know where we want to number up to these days, let's go and find, a handful of people out there who actually want to live in a place like Wyoming, who wanted that for their recreation time, yet are willing to bring their sort of skills and abilities to help us sort of in the economy and build what we want to do. I think there's probably plenty of them out there. We need to go and find the right people and market ourselves, not just as a place for tourism and recreation, but as a place to actually live and bring and operate and use your skills. So that's probably, I've rambled enough. I've done more than my 5 minutes. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. My name's Tara Righetti. I'm with the University of Wyoming, and definitely honored to be here with all of you, especially seeing so many of my colleagues in the audience who could speak to these same issues and questions. So I can't give per se the perspective of the university, but I'd like to share my experience within the university here in Wyoming and what we're doing towards a value add and more diverse economy and preparing students to engage in that way, and then in the research we're doing as well. I'm fortunate in that I have a triplicate appointment that allows me to interface in the College of Law, the College of Business, and the School of Energy Resources. And that has been incredibly fun and enriching, and that I get to do really interdisciplinary work with a large group of students at both the undergraduate and graduate levels. When Jack was mentioning this morning reverse mentorship, that really resonated with me, because the best days in the classroom are the days when I get asked questions I don't know the answers to, which happens fairly frequently. And it's because our students are thinking of things outside the box that wouldn't occur to me, because they're coming from a younger generation and a different set of experience, and that really broadens the experience of everyone in the classroom. So speaking to a few of our programs and how we can address the question both internally of raising and developing a workforce here that will be ready to serve as leaders in the value-add industry that can be in Wyoming, in addition to recruiting from outside. So I think we do that in our MBA program, which really encourages global thinking. We just had students travel to Germany, and then they come back and they apply that in a very focused curriculum that looks at international business and at health and at energy. I'm the director of our professional land management program, and those students are working to solve issues that are going to come up if we permit new industrial facilities, if we want to have nuclear power here, looking at right-of-way and transmission issues and issues that come up with federal lands. And then in the law school, we have students with a very diverse curriculum studying everything from commercial law to human rights and in energy, and I think our EENR, which is Energy, Environment, and Natural Resources students, are learning things in the classroom, and then they're applying that in a clinical setting in partnership with the Wyoming Attorney General. So it's really fun. The other side of that, though, is that we also get to do research. It reminds me of what Lewis Carroll said in Alice in Wonderland, and that's the fun of being in a university, is you get to try to think of 6 impossible things before breakfast. So we're freed in some way to really ask those questions and look big picture and say, why not? And that's happening in a way that's going to address the things that Ian talked about competitive advantage and scalability. But I want to speak specifically to the research that's happening in the areas of CO2, because there is a lot of innovation happening in the School of Energy Resources that speaks directly to that. We have a carbon engineering group which looks at different ways that we can use our abundant natural resources, some of our competitive advantages. What can we do with coal and oil and gas and CO2 other than generating electrons? And how do we create industry around that? I've been fortunate to collaborate with other folks in our Carbon Management Institute, looking at opportunities to experiment here in Wyoming with geologic carbon capture and sequestration. And then also our Enhanced Oil Recovery Institute is looking at ways to use CO2 to increase production from our existing fields. So that's been very rewarding. As sort of, if I can switch hats and put on, to some extent, my lawyer hat, one thing that Ian said, which I think is so important, is that we have to build not for the regulations that exist today, but for the regulations that will exist. And this is a challenge that we've really been looking at in the College of Law and in the College of Business with some interdisciplinary research that says, how can we create regulations that are dynamic? We make regulation in this environment that is so fluid, and yet the regulations that result are usually very static, and they're based on technological and economic models that represent just a snapshot of one possibility at 1 second in time. So one thing we've been looking at is how can we craft rules that encourage investment and innovation, that say to the regulated community, try to solve these problems, look towards the future, and you won't be penalized if things don't go exactly as you want. And furthermore, if you put the investment into innovation now, we're going to assure a pathway that allows you to recoup those costs over the life of the investment, because we're not making investments in the regulated sectors based on next quarter, as you said, but rather thinking, how are these investments going to look over 30 or 40 years? And so looking at how we can do that within a model that incorporates cooperative federalism and business-friendly initiatives here as well is really important. So I think we're doing great work, and I would just encourage everyone here to reach out to the folks here from the university and share your ideas as well about how we can be preparing students to join your organizations as independent thinkers and innovators in the years to come. So thank you.
You know, we've heard a lot of ideas from our panel members, and by way of introduction of myself, I've spent most of my experience has been in the coal industry. I've lived in Wyoming and worked in Wyoming since 1981. And the one thing that I'd like, when I reflect on Jack's presentation and then also the presentation that Ian had, is that shift in perspective. And as we all know, and we've lived it the last couple of years, particularly in the coal industry, but also we're seeing it in the oil and gas, is that the changes that are happening in our landscape, our industrial landscapes, are happening at a speed and pace that none of us necessarily expected. And so, to a certain extent, I think we're a bit behind the curve. We're behind that curve that Jack showed. But I think the other piece of it that came through the presentation is the shift in perspective. And for those of us who provide coal products or any kind of fossil fuels, oil and gas, the perspective right now that we see in the landscape out there in a lot of the thinking that people have is leave it in the ground. And Ian, you said we need to think about our power plants as CO2 factories. And that's really a shift in thinking. And I know at the University of Wyoming, at the School of Energy Resources, that's some of the research that is being done is really thinking about how do we think of coal, the coal refinery? How do we think about products that we could make from coal that are not necessarily just power plants, fueling our power plants, but making other value-added products? So I think we've heard a lot of great ideas from looking at what are the foundational building blocks, what is the big idea, what is the big plan, what is the big bold plan that we can have, to what is the process that we need, what are some lessons that we can learn from others, to thinking about things from a global perspective, and then how do we make our regulatory landscape dynamic enough to be able to accommodate these things. But I would really bring to the party here this sense of urgency. We've talked a lot, we've planned a lot, and we do have to take time to think, but as Cindy said, we have to act, and the state is facing a set of dynamics that, irrespective of who's sitting in the office, the political realities, the universal realities, that we have to do something different because we're faced with dynamics that we can't change. The market dynamics are there in front of us. So with that, we wanted to allow time for the audience and also the panel members to ask questions amongst themselves. So we have about 10 minutes that we can entertain questions from the audience, and then also questions, Cindy and Martin and Tara and Shawn, of Ian or each other. So with that, I'd open the floor up and open the panel up to discussions. Yes, Gal.
Oh, first thing was, how do I explain to my wife I don't have a car? No, I just started over again. I mean, I knew what we did wrong, and, I call it leaving dirt in the corners, and when you're young, you kind of, if there's something that's going wrong, you maybe not correct it as quickly as you should. And for me, I knew what to do. I knew there was lots of opportunity out there. I saw all this flare gas, and I knew it had, 50% of the flare had liquids in it, and I thought, we can build a different kind of plant that the big guys aren't building. We can build something that's really efficient. And so I knew that opportunity was there, and it was hard to assemble a capital because I'd just gone broke. So, that's not the best place to be raising new money in. And so we had to do a lot of tap dancing. But once you got it going, then it was obvious. And I never left any garbage in the corners after that. I always cleaned it up at the end every day. If there was something bad, I went and dealt with the bad things at the end of the day. I didn't let them accumulate. And I think that's a difference, maybe.
Ian, just a follow-up question on that. The innovative financing, I mean, you put together a set of, using current, I'll use financial instruments, but do you have any suggestions from the state's perspective as we start to embark on these processes where we really want to act?
So when you look at these things, the resources are a multiple. The underlying resources are a multiple of the capital in the diversification project. So in our project, over its life, there's probably $500 billion of reserves that will go through that project if it lasts 100 years. And the margin in the project will be about $1 trillion over the next 100 years, undiscounted with some kind of assumption on inflation. So the reserve owner, the person that owns the resource, has to be in the equation somehow. And usually what happens is, in where I come from, the government owns the resources. They have to be there. They have to contribute their royalties, and they have to take risk on their royalties to get something like this to happen. If you don't have that cost of service, you can't get the capital low enough to do these things. You can't do them at a 12% cost of capital. They're so big, they don't work. And so you have to figure out a way, how do I get that cost of capital down? And this, the same things exist here that exist in Alberta. I'm sure this is an expensive place to build things because nobody's here. It's like Alberta, there's nobody there. So you have to bring people, that drives up the cost, and the only way you can fight back on that is reduce the cost of capital. And what that means is, I know people hate it because they say to me all the time, how come the government's involved? There isn't anybody else. That's who's got the reserves, and that's a multiple of the value of the cost of the facility.
Well, we've had some changes in the political landscape maybe that will open a window of opportunity for us in the next 4 years, hopefully.
Sorry, there's one other thing I'll say before,
yep.
Sorry. In Alberta, it used to be the federal government owned everything. And in about 1930, they transferred it all to the province, and then the province was in control of it. And the province brought people from the U.S. up to tell us how to do it, and we brought the people from the USGS up there and figured out how to have a competitive system that was only in Alberta. And I don't know if the political potential is here to do that, but if you got it under your own control, then you can start doing stuff with it.
I'm sure I speak for a lot of people, but or I don't know, I can't speak for a lot of people, but I know that has some appeal. Go ahead.
Yes, not primarily Mr. McGregor, but as all of you mentioned it, I'm working with some folks on a carbon capture project that with the carbon intended generally for EOR within a fairly short pipeline, say 60 miles. Given the fact that we produce a lot of retail energy for the U.S. and we use coal to do it, given the fact that the technology is available on carbon capture off of coal-fired power plants, how do you see the viability, the economic viability of that as compared to the other CO2 projects that you referenced in your speech? You know, we obviously in Wyoming, it affects the coal industry, it affects our jobs in retail power production, and there's billions of barrels of oil within short range of some of these plants to recover. Thanks.
I don't think coal has a hope today with a new coal plant incorporating carbon capture. I don't think that's an economic trade. But what I do think is economic is if you have a fully depreciated coal plant and you're faced with the decision, am I going to shut this down or not? Then I think you can afford the capture technology at today's price, which is, I think that price is coming down every year because more people will do it. I think if you've got a fully depreciated plant and you look at the revenue in today's environment from oil and electricity, you can get that to be economic. That's a mid-teens unlevered project rate of return, which is enough to do it. It's not great, but it's enough to get them going.
Go ahead.
So, for everybody in the panel, basically I hear about the Robic multidimensional problem that it means to create this type of change. So, if somebody have an idea of how to create, for me it's like create a team and create a leadership. And what would be the type of leadership that you would put in a kind of a board, counseling board? What is your thought process or that roadmap to create that initiative, like as you said, put it in action? Is that a government driven? Is a let's say a entrepreneur driven? So exploring for Ian or Jeane.
Ian, if you'd like to, and I'll be happy to. I do think this is something that Shawn probably has a perspective on, because I think some of what you're embarking on and have embarked on is part of that CEO, that your panel or your board that helps drive this. But I think that's, and Ian, if you've got some thoughts, be interested to hear them as well, just from the project and how you participated in the Alberta Heartland, kind of process.
Okay, I'm a foreigner. I'm kind of worried about talking too much.
Hey, we are inviting people in to help us.
So what I think is you have to create the environment. And, there's always this chicken and egg problem. It's really not there. If you just tell people, like when we started doing this, there were 9 refineries planned for the area. And some guy, I went and talked to the mayor of the local community, said, look, we really want you here. We'll back you. We'll give you an option on the land. So he gave us an option, and I didn't have to pay any money for it. Well, if we'd had to pay money for it at that time, we'd have probably said, we're not going to do this. But it was the start of the process. And his idea was he wanted industry in that area, and he was going to do everything possible to attract it. So it was, power lines, roads. Sometimes they had to close a road for us, fixing the bridge so we could haul heavy things in. But he never did that up front. He just did it along the way, and our government did some of that too. And so I think it's the environment that's there. Like, some of the things I've heard today is create an area, tell people that they can, there's a permit in this area. We don't care how you emit sulfur. We're going to tell you what the ceiling is, but go ahead and do it. Like, we spent $400 million before we had a permit. That was a different time. I don't think we could attract that capital today. So if somebody told us, you got a permit, but you have to live within these rules, we're smart enough to figure out if we can live within the rules. And so if you had a place like that here, if it was a place that had power, water, transportation, all those things, you make it easier for someone to come. And then let them figure out how to meet it. Don't be prescriptive. Tell them only what the end point you want is.
Shawn, do you have some perspective?
Jeane, I'll add a little to that. I believe one of the successes of the Wyoming Business Council is the model in which we have a board of directors of 15 businessmen and women who can not only provide to us a private sector perspective, but also provide access to their business connections so that success can beget other success. I believe that private sector-led model is very similar to other successful initiatives spearheaded by the governor, such as the Tier 1 engineering initiative. And I believe it's a similar model that the governor is envisioning for this Endow initiative, where we have local, regional, national, international business leaders who can provide their expertise to this complex array of building blocks and opportunities, and start putting results and action steps rather than another planning exercise. So I believe that the key to moving forward, either on a specific project like large-scale industrial area or a larger long-term diversification effort, is the importance of having that private sector, business and industry perspective and those best practices from actually focusing on results and not just talking or planning.
Jeane, if I could just speak
Yep.
a little bit to the EOR and the coal, the power plant side of it. You know, we are working with a few of our coal plants. We are working with third parties on opportunities to where we can use our units, our coal plants, to provide them what they need so they can do the EOR. I'd say right now they're reasonably small scale, but you know, being the regulated utility that has the large coal fleet in the state, you know, we see that as an opportunity for us to be able to provide the opportunity for the other industries to be able to take that from us and use it to expand their industry and the business. And so we are working in partnership in several situations, trying to allow that capture of some CO2 so it can start to facilitate other industries.
Again, certainly like to thank Jeane and all of our panelists, and again, thank you to Ian McGregor. In a few minutes, we'll be breaking for lunch, so just as a reminder, there's a couple buffets that'll be out in the foyer, another buffet line out through these doors. We do have a lunch program that will start at 12:20 promptly, so we'll ask you to move through those lines in an orderly fashion so we can get underway at 12:20. And now kind of in a Paul Harvey rest of the story moment, which is another yellow yield sign radio program, I think. I'd like to invite our President Bill Schilling and Governor Mead back to the podium to finish out that story of intrigue that Bill started earlier.
Okay, we know that you all are in great suspense, and I gave you some clues like April 2nd, 2017, and the great American pastime. So, Governor, last week, what was an exciting thing last week?
My son got a solid C in English.
Well,
Wrong answer, wrong
the
answer.
C is pretty close. What else?
Chicago Cubs won the World Series.
They did. And so, we have some Chicago Cubs world champion hats on. Now, the governor has been a tremendous partner as with this whole event. And about 5 years ago, we had Joe Ricketts, who is the owner of the Chicago Cubs, with us. Do you want to share a few stories about that, or do you recall those?
No.
Okay, like climbing Mount Kilimanjaro?
I want you to share that story.
Okay, so one of the great stories was he talked about drinking a lot of beer and eating pizzas with a friend in...
Joe Ricketts did, not me.
Joe Ricketts, exactly. Although we would have had a great time with him, wouldn't we?
Yes.
So, and that was in Omaha, and they drank a lot and ate a lot of pizza on a Friday night. And then they said, we ought to climb Mount Kilimanjaro. And they did, and it was quite arduous. And his moral of the story was, don't drink a lot of beer and eat a lot of pizza when you're climbing Mount Kilimanjaro. So I kind of thought about the forum, and it was because of Governor Meade that we were able to get Joe Ricketts to speak at the forum 5 years ago. So I gave him a call on last Friday, and he called me back on Tuesday morning, and how are you doing? We talked a bit. And I said, do you think we might be able to get some tickets to a Chicago Cubs baseball game? And he said, sure. And he said, well, what do you want? And I thought, well, this is an opening. I'm representing my good friend here, the governor, and others. I said, how about 8 tickets for opening day on April 2nd, 2017? Good seats between first and third base, so they'll swing around that area. And he said, no problem. So we have State Senator Leland Christensen. Where's Leland? Here. Who's going to be auctioning these off for those of you who are Cubbies fans, or for that matter, Chicago fans. And we're going to lock them off in terms of groups of 2 tickets. And what are we going to do with the money? Well, it'll go to the Wyoming Heritage Foundation, which is a 501c3 foundation, for Leadership Wyoming, because Dave Reynolds, many of you remember Dave, who passed away about 1.5 years ago, gave our Leadership Wyoming program an endowment of $70,000 for scholarships for members to go through the program, and our goal is to try to start matching that gift. So, Leland, you're on, and we've got 3 spotters. So Linda T and Linda W and Jennifer, you might want to spread out in the room here and catch people as they raise their hands, and Leland's going to lead the show for us.
All right, Leland.
All right, so 2 tickets. We're going to have 4 packages. And generally, the prices are cheapest early in the auction, so there we go. 2 tickets, let's get it going. For great seats, I think we didn't get them named, but when you have the owner promise to take care of you, you have a sense of where that's coming at. How about it? Let's go, ladies and gentlemen. How about a $500 bid for 2 tickets opening game from the owner? I'm $500 right here, bid 5. Thank you. Now 5.5. 550 one time. I'm going to give 550. I'm bid 500. Roger's in at 500. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the time to, new money over Bob Reese. 550, 550, and now 6. 550, now 600. 550. Anybody go 600 out there? 2 tickets. I'm hearing it in the background, in the light. Oh, there we go, 600, thank you, 600, now 6.5. 600 over here, now 650. 650, one time, I'm gonna go 650, 50, anybody out there go 650, 600, 650. Ladies and gentlemen, 600's a bid. Right down here, 650, 650, and now 700. Back here at 700, 700, now 750. 7.5, one time, I'm gonna go 750, yes, 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 750, now 800. 800 in the back, come on back at 800. 800, money's over here at 750, now 800. Ladies and new money in at 800 in the back. Thank you. 800, now 8.5. 850 one time. I'm going to give 850. 850 in the front. There we have it. 850 up front. Now $900. You're all out. 900 one time. I'm going to go 900. 900 in the back. Yes, yes. That looks like our new representative, Mike Garou. Is that you, Mike? Hey, there we go. Now that's how you, if you want to be in politics, you bid and we make you famous. 900, now 950. 950 one time, I'm gonna go 950. Anybody out there, 950? 950, 950, 950, and we're back at 950 now, $1,000. Don't quit now, Mike, at 1,000. Yes, 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 1,000. Now 10.5. 1050 one time, anybody go 1050? 1050, it's 1,000. 1050, you're out. 1050, money's in the back at 1,000. 1050, yes, 1050, and now 1,100. 1,100, and one time to go 1,100, and now 11.5. 1150. Come back at 1150, go 1150, 1150, sold at $1,100 in the back. Representative-elect Mike Garou. And if you ever pass through the Jackson Airport, Mike, that's for 2 tickets, and he makes a great breakfast, lunch, or anything like that.
6 more to sell.
All right, 3 more packages. Here we go. Wow, the price is 11. Save me some time here. Ladies and gentlemen, how about an $800 bid?